question from Andrew from the UK. Why does everyone believe Titus Andronicus, Shakespeare's first play, was entered anonymously in the stationer's register? Well, that's
lots of things were entered anonymously. Venus and Adonis was entered anonymously in the register.
And actually, it raises questions about the difficulty of chronology of the plays.
Yes.
Not everyone would agree.
It's published in 1594.
It's Shakespeare's first play.
I don't believe it was his first play.
I believe I'm with you, Stanley, on that. 1594 for me too.
What about Shakespeare's acquaintance with Ben Jonson? There is evidence that they knew each other. That's from Ellie. Yes, there is. And Stanley, this is posthumous evidence on the whole, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, except I'm just thinking it's in the first folio, the list of actors.
Yeah, technically those are only just, but they are also posthumous.
Yes, but you say I believe in posthumous evidence. I have no objection whatever to the validity of posthumous evidence. Ben Jonson is the person who tells us most about Shakespeare. Ben Jonson was a colleague of Shakespeare in the sense that his plays were put on by Shakespeare's company, one of them was. And he writes very intimately about Shakespeare. He writes sometimes critically about Shakespeare, but he also writes that he loved him this side idolatry. He writes the first full critical appreciation of Shakespeare. The Ben Jonson elegy in the first folio is a very important piece of criticism, the finest piece of Shakespeare criticism before Dryden later in the 17th century.
I'm not sure it's criticism, it's one of those sort of...
Sorry, I beg your pardon, I think it is criticism.
There's no criticism, it's just straightforward, over-the-top Elizabethan eulogy, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's...
See the harmony of this discussion continues. How do anti-Stratfordians or anti-Shakespeareans explain why lowly, in inverted commas, William Shakespeare of Stratford became the frontsman for all the works if he had no connection, i.e. because he was so lowly? That's from Jen, from Elsinore on Twitter. Thank you, Jen.
Elsinore,
I know.
That's great.
So how is that connection made with apparently a person of lowly origins with these aristocrats who have been nominated left, right, and centre?
I think Richard Field. I don't know about the aristocrat thing, but Richard Field for me is a possible link in terms of knowing, as I imagine he did know, Stratford was not a big place. He was only a couple of years difference in age. May well have known him and known of his willingness to enter any kind of deal. So, I mean, that's total speculation. I'm just saying that there are possible mechanisms by which William Shakespeare could have been brought in and, decided
All right,
to do
but
the
a
job.
Stratford man publishes William Shakespeare's first long poem. Surely that's a connection between Stratford and Shakespeare the writer.
Venus and Adonis in 1593.
Yes, but we have all the other problems that show that no one who knew him the man from Stratford himself, appears to know him as a writer.
Somebody tweets, Helen tweets, I often see sceptics claiming that a man of letters would not let his daughters grow up illiterate. How do we counter this? They weren't illiterate.
Well, one of them definitely was. She signs her name with a cross, doesn't she?
We have Susanna's signature.
Yeah, she can sign her name.
Trust.
No, but Judith can't sign her name, can she?
Renee Weiss of University College has interestingly made the connection that Susanna was taught to write by her father because their handwriting is similar with the closing up of the ends and the
similarly bad.
So similarly bad, but what's wrong with having bad handwriting? People might have bad handwriting.
Well, people who were living by the pen in that day, especially when you have the blotting issue. I mean, and this is the other thing. Look at those signatures and compare them with what Hemmings and Condell say about what they received, the blotless manuscripts. I mean, this is not a penman who could avoid blots. So therefore, they must have been receiving fair copies. Now, what is... Well,
they weren't. There's the textual evidence shows that they were just generalizing in a very vague way. If you've studied the texts that are printed in the folio, you know perfectly clearly that some of them were printed from abominable manuscripts.
Exactly. So what's really going on there?
Well, what's going on there is that they're just being flattering because they're writing a preface to the volume.
Yeah, but then what does Ben Jonson say about that? It's quite interesting. He says that they took offence when he said that, would that he had blotted 1,000.
Or by blotted, all he means there is revised.
But how can you say that's what he means? Because there are so many different ways of reading that.
How can you say he doesn't?
I'm simply saying, Stanley, that there are multiple ways of reading any text. And Ben Jonson in particular is extraordinarily enigmatic and ambiguous in the way that he writes about Shakespeare.
There's a question here about collaboration, which is an interesting one. About, is it possible to conceive of an idea that the King's Men, Shakespeare, the actors we worked with for some of his life, formerly the Lord Chamberlain's Men, collaborated on the works and that they were involved? That's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree they collaborated in the sense that when
UK.
Shakespeare was rehearsing, putting his plays into rehearsal, I'm sure that he got suggestions from the authors. There's a very interesting example in Midsummer Night's Dream, where the first quarto has one speech spoken entirely by one person, and in the folio, which is a more theatrical text, demonstrably more theatrical text, that speech is the speech of Theseus, is divided up between Theseus and Lysander, which is clearly a more theatrical way of putting the speech across. And I think it's very likely that an actor said, look, you can't expect me to speak all these lines, both questions and comments myself. Let's let Lysander speak the comments. That's an example of Shakespeare's practicality, of Shakespeare being a man of the theatre, working very closely with his actors. There is, by the way, no evidence that Marlowe was an actor.
No, but there's no evidence that the author is working closely with his actors from what you've said. That in itself doesn't mean anything. We don't know.
Sorry, I'm sorry, there's masses more evidence. That's only one detail. There is, for example, the evidence from the first quarto of Much Ado About Nothing that the author of that play had in mind Will Kemp as the speaker of Dogberry's lines and Cowley as the speaker of Virgie's, which shows quite clearly that the author had these actors in mind.
You don't know that the copies that the folio was printed from, or that the quartos were printed from, where they have the actors' names in place, come from the author's own pen, or whether they're from copyists. We have no idea.
We have considerable ideas about them. I must dispute that from the point of view of an editor.
We don't know that is the author who has substituted Kemp's name or Sinclair's name or anyone else's name. We don't know because we don't have the original manuscripts. We cannot see where they've come from. We're not aware of who's been copying and which, whether it's the author's copies or
this is the problem, isn't it? There's no smoking gun in history. It seems to me that Shakespeare can't have moved or breathed or done anything without somebody writing about it before you're convinced that it was Shakespeare of Stratford. And this is
but nobody said anything about it. It's a pity, really. I mean, you'd think that they would be interested in.
Lots of people have said they said
there he is. Yeah, but no.
Why do you see from CJ on Twitter, who agrees with you, Roz? There's no evidence that links Shakespeare to the writer no links to the link Shakespeare the writer to Shakespeare of Stratford. Question which often comes up from the anti-Shakespeare side: why did Stratford Shakespeare's leave no books in his will? Well, that's again using a gap and trying to turn it into a narrative which you find convinces your belief and fuels your belief. If Shakespeare co-authored with Middleton and others, are all Jacobean playwrights part of the conspiracy? Well, that's what people would believe, Jane. Thanks for your question. Why would Ben Jonson and the others collude in this lie? I love Dame Janet Sussman's point on 60 Minutes with Shakespeare when actors couldnn't keep secrets. They'd have told somebody this conspiracy, and it is a conspiracy. Whether it's a theory,
why do you think actors would be in on it? What on earth makes you think that people
in order
would be
for them
in
to have covered up the real author.
Yeah, but why would they need to? They're given a script. They're given their parts. In fact, they're given individual parts, and they rehearse them.
I also find it interesting how this discussion hardly ever includes reference to the sonnets themselves. I know they do in Marlowe's case because they do tell the story, but the poems aren't often under the dispute in this. It's always about the plays people talk about.
One of the poems ends with "For my name is Will."
One of the sonnets.
Yeah, I know. And
not Marlowe, not Chris.
I agree, and I say, I agree that he does say "My name is Will" more than once. And in the Marlowe papers, I use that as saying him trying to kind of feel his way into the persona, and feel like they love these plays. He's struggling with the idea that people love these plays that are attributed to someone else, and he's saying, "But my name is Will because that's my pen name. That's who I am." But he's also playing on the idea of will, not as in the name, but as in the...
Molly from New York says, "I've spent much of my life devoted to the study of Shakespeare, and for me it always comes down to, why does it matter?" Molly, there are lots of people who respond, "Why does it matter?" And to which I always respond, of course it matters. It matters utterly. Wouldn't you like to know as much as possible about the painter of The Last Supper or the author of Mrs. Dalloway, and those points of human connection, so that absolutely matters. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the discussion about it.
Yes, to me, it also matters that the works, give and take, the collaborations, show the development of an imagination, the development of a mind. And I think this is, to me, is rather in the same way that you can see the works of Beethoven, for example. You can see him developing, growing, maturing as he goes on. I think this is true of Shakespeare too.
So we're going to have to wrap up, but I just want to say that our next webinar is on Monday, the 6th of May at 4 o'clock. reviewing Shakespeare. I'll be joined by Paul Prescott of the University of Warwick, and we'll be launching a new review site to do with Shakespeare Reviews International. There'll be no other site like it. I want to remind you too that happybirthdayshakespeare.com, a project by bloggers around the world to celebrate the impact of Stratford's greatest son, is still live. We were celebrating Shakespeare's Stratford birthday here in Stratford last weekend, a great celebration for many around the world. And of course, the Birthplace Trust received lots of messages of goodwill from people who love Shakespeare, sending messages to Stratford. I'd like to thank Cambridge University Press very warmly for sponsoring this most lively discussion, and I'd like to thank my co-contributors to this discussion, Stanley Wells and Ros Barber, very much indeed.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stanley.